The man who's responsible, in a sense, for putting the spin in Make in India is right here with us, the Secretary of the DIPP, Ms. Amitabh Kant. Sir, appreciate you joining us. Let me start by asking you about a lot of conversation around what this budget has actually done for the economy, what this budget is going to do in terms of growth. But let's talk about Make in India specifically. I know that you had a long list of expectations to actually try and boost the Make in India vision to make sure that it is in fact a reality. Do you believe that we've come short on those expectations? Do you believe a lot more could have been done to really spur manufacturing growth?
If you look at the budget in totality, this provides a huge impetus to growth, particularly to manufacturing in many ways. One of the major constraints to doing large-scale manufacturing in India was inverted duty structure in a vast range of sectors. I think that's one issue which the FM has addressed head-on. And he's looked at 22 different items where there was inverted duty structure. He sets it right. I think if India is to become a great manufacturing nation, and I think it needs to be seen in this perspective, that in the Indian context, MSMEs actually provide 84.1% of the jobs. And out of that, 69% of the jobs come from micro enterprises. So actually this budget goes the whole hog in pushing startups, entrepreneurship, and venture funds.
Okay.
So I think there's a huge impetus as far as venture funds is concerned. And thirdly, to my mind, there's one big thing which FM didn't read out, but it's all there in the fine print, and which is about any investment on plant and machinery gets a 20% depreciation, and that's a big one.
That is a big one, and I'm surprised that the finance minister didn't actually make a big deal of that, because that is certainly something that industry would have liked to hear much more of in the budget. But I'll pick up on each of those points, but let me start with the big picture as far as corporate tax is concerned, because that is clearly going to be a big incentive when people are looking at large-scale manufacturing in India. The roadmap that's been articulated is to bring us down from the current 30% to 25% over a 4-year period. We don't have clarity what's going to happen because the exemptions start to be removed starting next year. Given the uncertainty surrounding what happens to revenue buoyancy, will this government actually be able to stick to the 4-year timeline that they've laid out in this budget as far as coming down to 25% is concerned? The uncertainty remains. Plus, add to that the fact that you've actually hiked the surcharges, so now your effective rate, corporate tax rate, is higher than 34%. So in that sense, doesn't it disincentivize large-scale manufacturing today?
I think it's very important to look at the size and scale of manufacturing, and it's very important that as India gets into non-linear manufacturing and thinks out of the box, it's very important that we do size and scale right. It's critical and it's important. It's also important to realize that India is growing at about 6%. Growth is accelerating. India is the only oasis of growth in the midst of status quo all over across the world. And I personally...
The core sector data doesn't seem to suggest that we're any better than anybody else at this point in time, sir, despite what the CSO might say.
I'm extremely confident, and I'm pretty confident that India is going to accelerate its growth, and we are going to get into a higher trajectory growth rate. I see signals of that happening in many ways in terms of, if you were to look at, the best way to look at it is in terms of the investment coming in, or look at the FDI data. And if you were to look at the FDI data as on the approved projects this year, till December, as compared to the previous year, there's 144% growth as compared to the previous years. And if you were to look at overall FDI growth this year as compared to the previous year, there's almost a 32% growth. So I personally feel, and the number of projects in the pipeline are quite pretty good. My pulse feeling is, my ground feeling is, not from a television studio, but from a ground, is that we are well on track to a high trajectory growth rate.
I don't think the ground reality in television studios and what you're picking on is not aligned, sir, but I won't get down to that. Let me ask you about FDI because you were taking us through the numbers. Do you believe that it's going to be largely defense-related FDI that we are going to see coming in, or do you see that even in sectors like insurance, where, by the way, Parliament is currently debating the amendments to the insurance bill, you've already operationalized the FDI hike in insurance via the press note which you issued even before the bill was tabled in Parliament a couple of days ago. Do you believe it's largely going to be FDI into sectors like defense, or do you believe that it's going to be more secular coming into areas like insurance as well?
Actually, in the last couple of months, we've really opened up India as far as the FDI regime is concerned. We've opened up defense, we've opened up railways, we've opened up construction.
Nothing has come into, nothing has come into railways yet.
No, wait for a while. Patience is a virtue, so just hold on. Railways, we've opened up construction, easy entry and exit. We've opened up insurance, we've opened up medical devices. I see a huge amount of investment happening both domestic and FDI in defense. I just met this very young entrepreneur, Dynamatic Technology from Bangalore. He started making one day after the Make in India was announced. He's just delivered the first airframe to Boeing. He manufactures for Boeing, for Bell helicopters. He exports to BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen, all from India. And I see a lot of entrepreneurship growing in this sector. And I personally feel that defense will be an early flower to be plucked. It's an area where, in many ways, India has an inherent strength simply because the auto component sector is very well grown. I mean, that's a sector which has grown and evolved over a period of time. And all these manufacturers in the auto component sector can graduate easily and become manufacturers for defense production. And that'll be a huge area of growth in the coming years, simply because India is going to be a big buyer as well.
Okay, defense, the big FDI opportunity, as well as from a perspective of encouraging domestic manufacturing as well. But let me just stick with FDI. There was a lot of belief or hope or expectation that finally in this budget, we would see the government clarify its position as far as FDI and B2C e-commerce is concerned. B2B e-commerce, 100% FDI is allowed. The hope was that since you're talking about investment in startups, since you're talking about nurturing the startup ecosystem, you would finally clarify what the government's position is on B2C e-commerce. The budget has stopped short of that. The DIPP has stopped short of that. Is this proposal on the table, off the table? What do we expect as far as B2C e-commerce is concerned?
The policy is extremely clear. It's extremely lucid. It's absolutely crystal clear. We allow business-to-business e-commerce. And that is, I mean, if you look around the world, the best examples of growth is when companies have grown through the B2B model. Look at the example of Alibaba. The whole story of Jack Ma is a story of B2B. You have to learn from the best examples from around the world. Don't copy the wrong examples. Copy an example where you will allow Indian entrepreneurship to grow, prosper.
So Alibaba is better than Amazon?
Well, I won't make a subjective decision, but I really feel that India must allow homegrown entrepreneurs to grow. You know, I mean, I feel very heartened.
Is Flipkart not a homegrown entrepreneur?
No, I feel very heartened about the fact that Flipkart and Snapdeal,
but
they take on Amazons of the world, and I think we should allow them a little more time to grow, prosper, and we should allow many more entrepreneurs to grow and prosper. There are issues on B2C, and one of the key issues is that whether it will lead to large-scale imports. So these are issues which are being examined, and we'll take an appropriate decision at the right time. But to my mind, B2B is a very good model of growth.
Okay. Media, are we likely to see broadcast media and FDI hike review anytime soon?
Not under discussion at the moment.
Not under
but
discussion
let me just tell you that India is one of the most liberal countries as far as the FDI regime is concerned. Other than multi-brand retail, India is the most open, and if you feel there's anything more that we can open up other than multi-brand retail, you just talked about media, that's not under discussion. But anything more that we can do.
I gave you three already, sir. Multi-brand retail, B2C e-commerce, and media.
So I'm saying that anything more that we can do, B2B B is already 100% open. But anything more that we can do, and this particular budget has brought in fungibility of FDI with FII. We have many other things on the table right now which are getting processed. But I think we have a pretty stable, consistent, and predictable policy on FDI right now.
Okay, let me move away from FDI, sir, and talk to you about whether the real momentum when we talk about the ease of doing business, because as somebody was pointing out that this budget, in comparison to the budget that the finance minister presented in July, he mentioned ease of business in his speech 5 times or 11 times, and in the previous budget the mention was just once, and he mentioned investment 31 times in this speech. So in the context of the ease of doing business, is it really going to be states that will have to drive the momentum? I've just had a conversation with the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, for instance, and he says that they will provide 21-day clearances. If you don't get a clearance in 21 days, it will be considered a deemed clearance. Is it really going to be the central government that can provide the thrust and the momentum on the ease of doing business, or will it have to come from state governments?
Shereen, that's a very important issue that you've raised, and I think in the long run, if India is to grow at rates of 9 to 10% per annum over a 3-decade period, then India must become the easiest place to do business. We made India over the years a very complex, very complicated and difficult place to do business. And I think there's a full political and administrative will right now to make India simple, easy. So we've cracked down on a number of things where we are removing processes, procedures, paperwork, act laws in the central government. We are using technology to converge and integrate different departments. We've just done the e-biz launch where we've integrated 14 departments of the central government. But more important than that is that we've listed down 98 items of starting a business, starting construction, getting electricity. We've told the states to act on them. Much of the action is in the states. We are pushing the states very hard, and we'll evaluate the states around June, July, and really bring in a competitive culture amongst the states. And
what's your own sense that you're
I'm very hopeful because I see Maharashtra in the last 1 month and a half has really cracked down, it's knocked out about almost 50% of the clearances required for starting a business and starting a construction. So I'm extremely hopeful. The states are extremely enthusiastic about inviting in investments. They realize that if they don't become easy, they will lose out. They have to create jobs. They have to get investments. And there's a huge mood in favor of growth in the states. I mean, I see a lot of energy and enthusiasm.
Okay, that's good to hear. One of the other challenges that people talk about when we consider this business of manufacturing in India is the acquisition of land. Now, whether or not the land acquisition ordinance goes through Parliament or not in this session, we don't know. They're attempting to table it in Parliament on Monday, is my understanding. But how significant is a challenge, and how can state governments try and convert this into an opportunity? And I come back again to examples from Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh, where, for instance, in Andhra Pradesh, the government has acquired land and they're hoping to acquire 10 lakh acres via the PPP route and develop it via the PPP route. They've acquired about 30,000 acres right now for the capital city. How much can state governments really do, despite the fact that we may perhaps not see this ordinance go through Parliament? We hope that it will, but if it doesn't, what can state governments do to ensure that land acquisition doesn't become that big a bottleneck?
Well, let me first say that the 2013 Act was extremely complex. It was anti-growth. It was anti-farmer in many ways. It was extremely pro-bureaucracy because it had, it had just had committees, subcommittees, processes.
The Indian bureaucracy is good at that, isn't it?
From a bureaucratic viewpoint, they would have loved it. But I think it was extremely complex and difficult. It was the most complex piece of legislation ever drafted in the world, according to me. And it's very necessary to change this if India has to grow rapidly, and if it has to provide a fair deal to the farmers more than anything else. And I think the important point on that was that farmers must get a fair price, but Absolutely. They must get it quickly. And there are different models of it. And one of the things is that in the Delhi-Mumbai corridor, I've worked with Gujarat, which does land pooling rather than land acquisition. And Maharashtra, where they do negotiated purchase. And Gujarat, they've done a huge amount of acquisition at Dholera for the DMIC without going through the Land Acquisition Act. In Maharashtra, they've done negotiated purchase at a fairly good price, and they're also giving 15% of the developed land. So I think innovative solutions have to be found on ground. And
at the state government level.
The state government. And secondly, I think land is essentially a state subject. Central government should not have got into it. Having got into it and created a mess, it must set it right. And also empower the states to draft their own land acquisition bills.
Okay. You know, besides Make in India and Digital India, the other buzzword for this government has been smart cities. There is a disappointment that there wasn't a lot of emphasis in this particular budget as far as the smart city project is concerned. In fact, I think if I look at the allocation, it's only about 6,000 crore rupees, which is paltry if you look at what the government had started talking about, which was 100 smart cities. Nobody knows at this point in time what these 100 smart cities are going to be about. How does the government intend to finance this project? What is going to be the nuts and bolts as far as the smart city project is concerned? Are you disappointed that we still don't have 9 months down the line any granularity as far as the smart city project is concerned?
So there are two strategies of smart cities. One is about greenfield smart cities, which we in the corridors are developing, like Dholera, where you do the planning, you do the detailed engineering, you embed the ICT component at the initial stage itself, where companies like Cisco, IBM and all have worked with us, and this is greenfield urbanization. It becomes, at the planning stage itself, you really use the power of technology to do new urbanization. And the second and the most challenging one is about brownfield urbanization, which the Ministry of Urban Development is doing. I think it's important to give it a little time, because brownfield urbanization is about, you know, any smart city is about good planning.
Yeah.
It's about good detailed engineering. It's about embedding technology.
And that's not our strong point.
Yeah, so I think it took, even in the DMIC corridor, let me tell you, good planning takes a little time. It's just that Indians are always impatient. They're so impatient, they want new cities to happen overnight. New cities don't happen overnight. All over the world, new cities have taken 20 years to happen. Nowhere in the world they've been cracked. Only China could do it in 17, 18 years. But Indians want new cities overnight. How can you do this? So allow good planning, allow good detailed engineering, allow drainage, sewage, solid waste to be done.
Oh, I don't think anyone will argue with you against that, sir.
I have a feeling that a lot of work has been done already by Ministry of Urban Development. It'll all get unveiled shortly.
Okay. You know, we've gone from special economic zones to national manufacturing zones or NIMS. We were hoping that perhaps this time around special economic zones would have gotten some relief as far as MAT was concerned. That is unlikely to happen because this government believes that we need to move away from an era of exemption Raj to simplified lower tax regime of about 25% over the course of 4 years. What happens to special economic zones? What happens to national manufacturing zones? What happens to these ideas? You know, 5 or 6 years ago, there was a queue to notify a special economic zone. Now, you would agree with me that there is a queue to denotify a special economic zones. What happens to these ideas and these zones?
So there are two things. One is that I'm a believer in good quality infrastructure. I'm a believer that if you're able to develop good manufacturing zones with good roads, good access, good power, water on tap, manufacturing will come in. It's better that government spends all its money on good quality infrastructure rather than providing tax sops. So I think the whole focus today in corridors is about creating new world-class infrastructure. And once you do that, you will see investments happen. The second thing is you raised was about having announced a policy. Yeah. I think there needs to be a consistency and predictability of that policy over a long period of time. And I think if a policy had been announced, there should have been a consistency and predictability over it over a long period.
So are we going to set up these large manufacturing zones?
They are already happening. I mean, Dholera, Shendra, one near Ujjain, one near Greater Noida, they're already work is in progress. So you will see a lot of that happening right before your eyes.
You're confident of that?
Absolutely.
Okay. You know,
I truly believe that more than television interviews, the government needs to focus on implementation, and implementation.
I agree with you 100%.
And that's what's happening.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Okay. Let me talk to you about what you think are the imperatives going forward now, because we've seen some of these things starting to take off. We've seen some of these sort of projects or missions that the government had launched when it came to office being launched. What do you believe now is the need of the hour to ensure execution? India has always fallen short of execution. Execution risk is our #1 challenge. This time around, we've said, all right, fiscal deficit can slip from 3.6% to 3.9%. People have allowed that or not quibbled about that because the expectation is that this money is actually going to be allocated towards public investment. It's going to lead to higher capex. But the problem then is the execution aspect of it. Do you believe that we're in a better position today as far as execution of infrastructure projects is concerned? Time overruns, cost overruns, project after project, whether it's the railways, it's the dedicated freight corridor. I can give you a long list, but do you feel better about being able to deal with those issues?
A dedicated freight corridor is quite on time. The work is under implementation. The time time period of implementation is 2018. So you'll have a dedicated freight corridor between Delhi and Mumbai and Amritsar and Calcutta, quite well on schedule. There are two things. One is 7% of your GDP is held up in stalled projects, and you need to crack that. You need to get projects off the ground which are held up, and I think that's important for the country. The country must find a quick solution, and the country is at it. The second key challenge for the country is to develop projects which are fully de-risked. That's a big challenge about taking land, taking all the approvals, housing them in the SPV, and bidding out projects which are fully de-risked into the marketplace. And I think so that the investor, when he comes in, doesn't have to face the risk of involvement. That's a tough one for the government, but government needs to create 100 projects, 100 large and big infrastructure projects which are fully de-risked, where all the approvals have been taken and have been housed in that SPV.
You know, you've raised two very important points, and this was a commitment that the finance minister has made in this budget, the plug-and-play model. They've decided to start it with the 5 UMPPs. The power minister spoke about the plug-and-play model for the 5 UMPPs and the coal sector 9 months ago as well. We still haven't arrived at this mechanism being operationalized. Essentially, the plug-and-play model is to de-risk it for an investor where the government and the regulatory authorities approve all the permissions before you actually bid out a project. But do you believe that we are likely to get anywhere close to the plug-and-play model as far as large infrastructure projects are concerned?
I mean, that's exactly what has been done in both the dedicated freight corridor and the DMIC. In both these models, actually, the government took the land. It took a little while. It took all the land, took all the approvals, the environmental clearances. It did the planning. It did the detailed engineering. Work is in progress, and it's a tough job. But that's how big projects have to be. You know, if India, to my mind, India needs to get the size and scale right.
Yeah.
And the size and scale right is about de-risking projects. It's about doing the entire project development by government agencies. And I think we need to focus in the next 2 years on getting that right. About 100 projects, fully developed, fully de-risked, put them out into the market.
You know, staying with the de-risking theme, and I ask you this in the context of revamping public-private partnership. A lot was spoken about in the previous budget as well, reiterated in this budget that we need to review or revamp the public-private partnership model. You spoke about stalled projects. And according to the economic advisor in the economic survey, projects worth 8 lakh crore rupees are stalled. 80% of that.
7.7 lakhs.
80% of that, he says, are projects that belong to the private sector, and one would believe that a majority of that would be infrastructure projects, but it's actually manufacturing that is responsible for a lot of those large projects. Now, the other problem is that the private sector is facing a balance sheet crisis at this point in time. How do you de-risk these projects? Can there be a way that the sovereign puts down equity to try and revive these projects? What can be done to de-risk these projects?
There are very many options available. Actually, one is companies are over-leveraged. And I think it's important to look at this case by case. I think in the road sector, there's a need for government to put in quick amount of money through NHAI and complete the projects, where projects are already done 85%. Let the NHAI come in, put in money, get them completed.
You think a 25-kilometer-a-day target is a realistic target?
It is doable. It is doable. It is doable if we put this, to my mind, 30 kilometers is doable if the country puts its whole energy and focus behind it. That's what the minister, Mr. Gadkari, has talked about. And to my mind, it's very, India needs to plan and execute that. If India needs to be a great country and grow at 9 to 10%, it must get the road sector right. It must get the rail sector right. And what the railway minister and what the Minister for Transport are talking about is thinking on those lines and actually trying to deliver on those ways.
So you believe 25 kilometers a day will be possible?
So it is possible. You need to look at different models. Now, PPP you need EPC model, you need a hybrid model of both government money coming in and an annuity coming in. And I think several models will allow you need an availability-based payment model, you need an annuity-based model. So if you have 4 or 5 different models operating, you will have different kind of projects getting executed on ground.
Okay, so before I throw this open to the audience, if they have any questions, let me ask you now, what more can we expect from the DIPP, sir? Whether it's FDI, it's ease of doing business, it's attracting manufacturing, it's Make in India. Give us the 5 things that are on your table as focus areas.
So, one is that we've done our action plans across 25 sectors on Make in India. The ministries have taken ownership of that. We've started monitoring that and we need to crack them on ground. So if you are able to push 25 sectors on manufacturing, many of these issues have been addressed in the budget. I think India will see a huge non-linear growth in manufacturing. We need to my mind, on our side, we need to get ease of doing business right. We are pushing it really, really hard. And I'm quite confident that in the days to come, both at the central government level and at the state government level, we'll try and make India a very, very easy place to do business.
Okay.
Thirdly, I think there's a huge bit about the private sector also acting. While the government is delivering in terms of policies, the private sector needs to put its money and get into investment rapidly so that India gets onto high trajectory growth rate. We've opened up the FDI regime as well, but I think the real challenge is for the Indian companies also to, as many young entrepreneurs are doing, I think the bigger companies, instead of talking, should get into investment.